Our protagonist once believed that even someone like him, whose talents had awakened, blossomed, and taken root on the battlefield, could begin a new life. In that new life, he hoped to create a family, something he had desperately yearned for. But he was mistaken. On the battlefield, someone remarked on his tenacity, saying it had been a long time since anyone had made him swing his sword more than 10 times. Our protagonist Argrick was kneeling, bleeding on the ground, when his enemy asked if he was the famed Argrick, the talent that had blossomed in war. He didn't respond at first, realizing his enemy knew exactly who he was, and to his surprise, he felt a strange happiness. Laughing, he told his enemy it was an honor to be recognized and called him Duke Thermion. Thermion asked if he knew his name. Argrick replied that he did, acknowledging that Thermion was one of the 6 Haxa-class knights of the Althian Empire. He added that a single day on the battlefield was more than enough to feel the weight of the Black Wave. Thermion, realizing Argrick had chosen to face him despite knowing his identity, remarked that it would be a shame to end such a talent prematurely. He then asked if Argrick had any intention of surrendering. After a brief pause, Argrick gripped his sword, pulling it from the ground, and raised it high, declaring that he was born on the battlefield, and there he would die. Argrick stood, swung his sword, causing a strong gust of wind, trying to intimidate Thermion. But Thermion merely stared back, unfazed. The gust of wind sends the destroyed objects flying, yet Thermion calmly noted that despite his words, regret lingered in Argrick's eyes. He remarked that Argrick would have made a worthy rival if given more time to grow. Thermion then released his own aura, moving his sword as he declared that if this was what Argrick wished, he would grant it. Charging toward Argrick, he expressed a hope that in the next life, Argrick could let go of his regrets. As Thermion's sword came down, Argrick stood calmly, waiting for the attack. With his one remaining hand, he summoned all his strength to block each of Thermion's relentless strikes. The war between the Drenic Empire and the Althian Empire had lasted for many years. Argrick's mother, a young widow and refugee, had left him alone in a chaotic world when she took her final breath. Argrick knew the fate of war orphans, and in his youth, he joined the knights, training for war. His life became one of survival, doing anything and everything necessary to live. When he turned 14, he was sent to his first battlefield. Driven by his determination to survive, he won decisively, and there his talents awakened. The mana core in his heart heightened his movements and senses to an extraordinary level. Years later, Argrick became a commander of the Drenic Empire's War Knights. The higher-ups informed him that they planned to recommend him for the upcoming special knight appointment. They explained that, with his talent, joining the ranks of the 5 Hexa-class knights of the Empire wouldn't be impossible. He smiled, thinking that after surpassing 3 mana cores and becoming a quad-core knight, he had finally acquired the opportunity he had long desired. He believed that, after this war, he might finally find peace from his weary life. He fought determinedly against the enemy, and just as he was about to achieve everything, Thermion appeared. With a single swing of his sword, Thermion easily severed one of Argrick's arms. Thermion silently stared at him before slashing again. Argrick managed to block the blow, but Thermion was too powerful. After only blocking a few strikes, Argrick's sword shattered into pieces, and he couldn't help but think it was a shame, as he had wanted to reach greater heights. Eventually, Thermion drove his sword into Argrick's chest, causing him to scream in pain, his thoughts turning to the family he had hoped to create. The force of the blow lifted him off the ground, and with the shattered earth beneath him, he was flung away. As he lost consciousness and was dragged across the battlefield, his dreams were pitifully crushed. Argrick thought it would end there, but when he opened his eyes, he saw lights and heard a sweet woman's voice asking if their little Dane was finally awake. A man's proud voice followed, saying that their son was a good boy because he hadn't cried. Confused, Argrick wondered what was happening. When his eyes fully opened, he heard the woman commenting on how clear and beautiful his eyes were and felt her hands holding his. The woman remarked that she was certain her child was a gift from the gods, to which the man agreed, replying that he was indeed a gift from the divine. Panicking, Argrick questioned what they were talking about. Then, the man, Arkan Saugers, lifted him up and affectionately called him Dane, telling him he must become a fantastic spearman, following in his father's footsteps. But before Arkan could continue, a woman, his mother Lily Saugers, interrupted loudly, grabbing him and insisting that Dane would become a fantastic assassin. Arkan asked Lily how she could plan to turn their youngest son into an assassin, saying it would be horrifying. He argued that a man should wield a spear, calling it the most beautiful and complete martial art. Lily, angry, retorted that an assassin was better than a spearman and that Dane could stealthily hide in the shadows, eliminating his targets without being detected, which was much cooler. Argrick, now Dane, realized he had not died on the battlefield as he expected. Instead, he had reincarnated, and not only that, he was reborn in the Althian Empire, the enemy nation, as the youngest son of a noble family. His new parents eventually agreed to teach him both spearmanship and assassination skills, but he noticed that they were constantly in a heated debate about his future. It seemed to him that, since he was born in their later years, they were particularly eager for him to follow in their footsteps. Later, the driver informed Arkin that they had arrived, surprising him. Arkin told Lily to take his hand, but she worriedly asked what would happen if the castle members saw them. Arkin laughed and replied that he was merely trying to hold his wife's hand, asking her why it would matter. Dane watched his parents caring for each other with affection and thought it was a touching sight. But when he looked forward, he was shocked to see a huge, beautiful castle. As they entered, Lily remarked that Arkin seemed happy to be home, noticing the smile on his face. Arkin agreed, thinking that in such a house, it might be easier for Dane's talents to flourish than he had originally imagined. 2 months later, Dane was in his room when Lily picked him up after hearing him babble. This made him realize that he was indeed babbling, a new experience for both him and those around him. He recalled that he had rarely encountered young children during his time on the battlefield. The few he did meet were wrapped in bandages, crying because they had nowhere to go. Many children wept for their parents as they slowly succumbed to starvation, fading away. Compared to those scenes, the Sagar's household was a place of fortune and wealth, meaning he wouldn't have to worry about starving here. Suddenly, the door to his room burst open, and Arkin excitedly entered, urging him to look at what he had brought. Stamping a long piece of wood on the floor, Arkin proudly announced that it was a spear. He then eagerly asked Dane how he liked it, boasting that it was long and beautiful. Lily placed Dane back into his crib, while he internally acknowledged that Arkin, despite his enthusiastic demeanor, was the strongest Hexa-class spearman in the Empire and a war hero known as the Blue Whirlwind. Lily, however, was furious. She asked Arkin how he could bring something so sharp into a child's room. Arkin explained that he just wanted to show it to Dane, but Lily reminded him that she had clearly said no early education. She also pointed out that she had been the best assassin in the Empire. She warned Arkin that if he continued, she would start teaching Dane the basics of stealth while he was still young. Dane noted that her raised voice was louder than one would expect from an assassin. Arkin calmly responded that everyone was doing it these days, mentioning that the famed magical house teleport placed a staff beside a newborn as soon as they were born. Lily angrily asked him if a spear was the same as a staff, reminding him that spears were sharp weapons. Dane sighed, thinking about how harmonious their family was despite these arguments. Dane realized that the reason his parents were so concerned about his future was because his 2 elder sisters had chosen careers unrelated to either spearmanship or assassination. Later, his sisters visited him. One of them, Arabella Sagars, playfully used her wind magic, making his cheeks puff up. Dane protested, but all that came out was babbling. Arabella, excited, remarked that he looked even cuter with fuller cheeks. Dane knew that Arabella, due to her talent in magic, had been on the path of a mage since she was young. At 12 years old, she was already a 3-chain class mage, which was a significant achievement since the highest rank for a mage was 9-chain. Arabella asked if he would like to learn magic with her later, as she found it boring to study alone every day. His other sister, Claire Sagars, chimed in, suggesting that summoning was also a good path. Dane knew that Claire was a talented summoner. She had succeeded in her first summon at the age of 7 and could now control 2 summons simultaneously. Arabella urged Claire to touch him, saying he was incredibly soft. Claire hesitated for a moment, and Dane, observing her, tried to convince her mentally. He initially thought she didn't like him, but he realized it was more of the jealousy older siblings sometimes feel when a younger one arrives. She seemed less wary of him now than before. Claire finally touched his nose and, with excitement, asked Arabella how he could be so soft. Arabella agreed enthusiastically. Claire touched him again, remarking that it might be fun if he turned out to be talented in summoning too, and offered to teach him later. Dane awkwardly laughed, realizing that everyone wanted to teach him their specialty. He then glanced at the family portrait. His father was a renowned Hexa-class spearman, his mother a former assassin who had once attempted to assassinate the Emperor, his eldest sister a genius mage, and his other elder sister a skilled summoner. Smiling, he thought that House Sagars was the perfect noble family and the ideal family he had always imagined. He then asked himself if there was any meaning to seeking revenge in his new life. Although his death had been regretful, he knew that the battlefield was a place of conflict, and it seemed almost laughable to think about taking revenge on someone who had defeated him fair and square. He gazed at his family, who were arguing about his future, and smiled. He had always longed for a family, and now he felt grateful to have been born into this one. Watching his father, mother, and sisters arguing with one another made him hesitate. He wondered if he was right in thinking that this was what a harmonious family looked like. In House Sagars, there exists a special ceremony called the choosing ceremony. When a child born into the family turns 1, various objects are placed on a table before them, and the family tries to predict the child's future based on the object they choose. Months later, his first birthday arrived, and everyone was bustling about, preparing for the celebration. The nobles were eager to see what Dane would choose, given that his elder sisters had chosen the paths of a mage and a summoner. Everyone knew the answer would be revealed at the choosing ceremony. A moment later, inside the mansion's party hall, the room filled with guests, and Dane sat with his family at the table. In front of him were several objects, including different weapons. The nobles noticed that his older sisters had brought their own items and found it endearing. Lily gently reminded him that he just needed to choose the one he liked. Dane sighed, glancing around and wondering what he should do, knowing that everyone was eagerly waiting for him to pick the object they had placed. His father, Arkan, thought to himself that Dane would probably be drawn to the dragon tail spear, a weapon with a spearhead made from the rare ore Dukran. When imbued with mana, it became as sharp and heavy as the mana put into it, making it a mystical magic spear. Arkan, who had spent his life with this weapon, hoped Dane would choose it. His mother, Lily, believed that Dane was too handsome to be an assassin, but she was convinced he would still select the dagger known as Nighthorn. Crafted from the ore ethereal, the dagger could hold all elemental powers and store various poisons. Arabella, his older sister, thought Dane would become a great mage and hoped he would follow her to the academy in the future. She had placed a subspace pouch on the table, an object that only mages or those with magical talent could use. Claire, his other sister, believed that if Dane had summoning potential, she could take him flying on her summon, Decaran, fulfilling her dream. She placed the summoner's sign on the table, a symbol summoners used to receive a code based on their talent and summon creatures. Dane looked around, suddenly feeling as if he could hear their thoughts. He sighed again, realizing how troublesome this situation was, but he knew he couldn't avoid it. He placed his hands on the table, preparing himself, while wondering which object to take. The nobles stopped what they were doing, watching him in anticipation. As he crawled toward the items, he observed the crowd's reactions, considering his decision carefully. Arkan, excited, urged him to choose something long and sturdy, while Lily suggested that the short, sharp object was prettier. Arabella reminded him that the pouch was her favorite, and Claire, stuttering slightly, asked him to pick the summoner's sign so they could summon together. Dane felt the pressure building. As he moved closer to the objects, he was shocked when all of them suddenly lit up at once. He stared in disbelief at the glowing items, wondering what was happening. Lily, panicked, asked Arkan what was going on, but he admitted he had no idea. Dane's older sisters called his name worriedly. The nobles, astonished by the sight, whispered among themselves, unable to comprehend how every object had reacted to him. They began to speculate that their young master must be a generational genius. Dane looked at the items, laughing inwardly. He had been talented in war, but it seemed his new life was on an entirely different level. Arabella, concerned, asked Arkan what they should do and if something like this had ever happened before. Arkan, still in disbelief, responded that he could hardly believe it himself. He and Lily exchanged a look, silently agreeing on a decision. Arkan then asked his daughters if they should teach Dane all 4 disciplines, leaving his sisters in shock. They couldn't believe what they were hearing, but Dane simply laughed, satisfied with the result. Years later, at the training ground, Dane was practicing hard but was momentarily pushed backward. However, he quickly composed himself and stood firm in front of his father. Arkan praised him, saying that he had perfectly polished the technique he had been taught. Now 6 years old, Dane thanked his father for the compliment. Arkan, with pride, patted his head and said that he had expected nothing less, since Dane was his son. Just then, someone approached them. Dane looked over and saw it was their butler, Herman. Herman respectfully reported to Arkan that he had brought the item. Arkan acknowledged him and replied that his timing was perfect. He then took the weapon from Herman, telling Dane that it was his birthday present. Arkan explained that he had originally planned to give it to him during his birthday banquet, but he wanted to give it to him early, before his mother had the chance. Arkan handed Dane the weapon and mentioned that it had been in preparation for 2 years, specially commissioned from a renowned craftsman in the capital. Dane was amazed as he examined the gift, feeling touched when his father warmly wished him a happy 7th birthday in advance. He immediately dropped his wooden spear and took the new one, thanking his father and swearing that he would use it well. As he inspected the spear, he noticed the sleek black handle and the silver spearhead, marveling at how amazing they looked together. He was also surprised by how light the weapon felt in his hands. Arkan asked if he liked it, and Dane enthusiastically replied that he loved it. Arkan smiled and told him that the spear had been adjusted to fit his physique, so he should get accustomed to using it. Excited, Dane swung the new spear around, making Arkan smile before calling his name more seriously as he reached for his own spear nearby. Arkan asked Dane if he remembered the difference between a sword and a spear. Dane answered confidently, explaining that the spear's length allows them to keep their opponents at a distance, and its narrow contact area makes it highly efficient in attack. Arkan confirmed that he was correct. As Herman bowed and excused himself to leave, Arkan continued, telling Dane that at a certain level, the spear becomes more difficult to use than a sword, which is the fundamental challenge of the weapon. He explained that a spear requires a minimum distance to attack effectively, but every weapon has its strengths and weaknesses. Even swords, which are often called perfect weapons, become vulnerable in certain situations. Dane nodded, assuring his father that he would keep this in mind. Arkin then picked up his spear, rolling it effortlessly in his hands, and told Dane that since he had received a new weapon, he would show him something impressive. Dane watched in awe as Arkin demonstrated the immense magical power of a Hexa-class spearman. The very energy Arkin emitted was overwhelming. Arkin closed his eyes to focus, took a proper stance, and channeled mana into his spear. When he thrust it into the air, a powerful explosion of energy erupted, distorting the space around them. Dane was amazed, realizing that his father's trust in his spear allowed him to easily break through the space barrier. Arkin explained that the distortion in space occurred because he emitted his magic power at the same moment he thrust the spear, utilizing a technique that harnessed the core's ability to concentrate magic power in one place. Dane nodded in agreement, recalling that his sisters had once mentioned that humans could push their physical abilities beyond their limits. He also remembered that as the number of cores increased, so did those limits, making him reflect on how, in his past life, he had reached the level of a quad-core knight. Arkin praised Dane for studying well and proudly told him that he now had 6 mana cores. Dane could hardly believe it and thought to himself that if he hadn't died in his past life, he might have achieved the same. Arkin then softly placed a hand on his shoulder, asking him to give his new spear a try, to which Dane eagerly agreed. Arkin instructed him to relax his mind, forget everything else, and focus solely on thrusting the spear. Dane confidently replied, yes. As Dane positioned himself, he remembered that in his past life, he hadn't had much interest in spears. After discovering his talent for swordsmanship, he had only used a spear as a secondary weapon. Determined to give it his best effort, he closed his eyes and focused. Arkin, observing him, noticed that Dane had naturally adopted a good stance. Arkin knew that it had taken him 7 years to master the technique, and he wondered if Dane could follow the same path. Suddenly, the space barrier shattered, leaving Arkin in shock. He couldn't believe that Dane had succeeded on his first attempt. He saw the spearhead pierce the space barrier and, in disbelief, shouted, asking how Dane had done it. Approaching him, Arkin told him he was impressed. Dane explained that at the moment he thrust the spear, he gathered magic power in one place, imbued it into the spearhead, and then, just as the magic reached the spearhead, he cut off the flow. Arkin was astonished and asked if Dane had truly imbued magic power into the spear, and then stopped the flow, forming a mana core in the process. Dane confirmed this and explained that while reading a book about creating mana cores, he had tried it himself and, by luck, succeeded. In truth, however, he had formed the core while practicing mana breathing. Arkin couldn't believe that Dane had formed a mana core simply by reading a book and, filled with pride, shouted that a genius had been born into their house. He told Dane that he had sensed his talent from a young age, but now he was certain of it. Arkin predicted that Dane would become an extraordinary warrior, to which Dane smiled, thinking that there would be more surprises in store for his father. Arkin, laughing proudly, mused to himself if his son would truly become a mage spearman assassin summoner. A few days later, on Dane Sagar's 7th birthday, the party hall was filled with nobles who had gathered to celebrate. Everyone seemed to be enjoying the event when Duke Thermion approached Arkin, laughing, and asked how long it had been since they last met. Arkin recognized Thermion and asked how he had been. Thermion waved off the formalities, saying there was no need for such formal talk between them. Arkin dashed to Thermion's side and whispered that many people were watching, and that he would relax the formalities later. Thermion told him to do as he pleased and asked if he knew where the boy was. Arkin called for Dane, asking him to come over and greet Duke Thermion. The moment Dane saw Thermion, he remembered how the man had defeated and killed him in his past life. Despite this, Dane followed his father's request. Thermion asked Arkin if this was the son he had praised so much. Dane introduced himself respectfully, though he couldn't help but feel anger bubbling inside. Nonetheless, he gracefully told Thermion that it was an honor to meet him. Thermion, pleased with the interaction, shouted to Arkin that he had a dependable son, and that it seemed he had nothing to worry about. Thermion then asked Arkin if Dane was learning the spear, just like his father. Arkin confirmed this. Just then, a girl approached them, and Dane was startled when he saw her. The girl greeted Arkin gracefully and introduced herself as Layla Thermion, the youngest daughter of the Thermion Duchy. A moment later, the guests were dancing and chatting happily while the musicians played lively music. As everyone enjoyed themselves, Arkin asked Thermion how the Baroness was doing. Thermion replied that they were trying every possible method but had yet to make any progress. Arkin, concerned, told Thermion that he was going through quite an ordeal, but he was confident that the Baroness would get better. Thermion responded that if he suddenly disappeared, Arkin should understand that it meant he had used a scroll to return quickly to the capital. He then asked where Dane had gone. Thermion mentioned that Dane seemed like a witty child and that he wanted to speak with him a little more. Arkan agreed, saying he also wondered where Dane was and noted that Layla was nowhere to be seen either. Thermion then spotted Dane and Layla outside in the garden and remarked that it seemed the party was boring for the two children. Meanwhile, outside in the garden, Layla told Dane that although she didn't like following her father everywhere, she was glad she had come to this party with him. She thought to herself that he looked even more handsome under the moonlight. Dane replied that he was glad to hear it, adding that their territory was a nice, peaceful place. Layla agreed but shared that in the Thermion territory, there was always something happening. Nobles visited daily to bow to her father, and even members of the imperial family occasionally appeared. Whenever that happened, she had to greet them in a dress, which she hated, as she much preferred wearing simple clothes and swinging a sword. Dane guessed that she must be skilled with a sword. She then asked what he enjoyed, and he replied that he liked both peaceful days and spear training. He mentioned that while their territory wasn't as lively as the capital, he looked forward to spear training the most. Layla, remembering Arkan's nickname, the Blue Whirlwind, told him that her father had often spoken about how incredible Arkan was. She then asked if Dane was also aiming for admittance into the academy. Dane replied no, explaining that he wasn't training with the spear just to get into the academy, which surprised her. She asked why not. This training for academy admission seemed like the obvious goal. He awkwardly explained that while he was training hard, his primary goal wasn't solely to join the academy. This confused her, and she asked what he would do if he failed to enroll. Dane replied that if he failed, he'd simply try again, and if he continued to fail, he would accept that the academy wasn't his path. Layla expressed disbelief, asking if he wasn't afraid of disappointing his family. Dane calmly replied that he wasn't. She admitted she was jealous of him, explaining that failure wasn't an option in her household, but quickly begged him to forget what she had just said. Dane sighed, realizing that even nobles had their own worries. He asked why she thought like that, especially when it seemed she would do just fine. This excited Layla, and she asked him if he would take a look at her swordsmanship. Surprised, Dane asked if she really wanted him to watch her swordsmanship. She excitedly replied yes, and seeing her enthusiasm, he agreed to watch for a bit. Layla then asked where the training ground was, and Dane told her to follow him, wondering if it would be fine for just a moment. A moment later, at the training ground, Layla swung her sword around skillfully, easily slicing through the air and even slashing the wall. She turned while swinging her sword smoothly, attacking and defending with precision. Dane was impressed, noting how seamlessly she transitioned between offensive and defensive movements. Her timing was excellent, but after a while, she began to go slightly off beat. After finishing her display, Layla, stuttering a bit, asked how she had done. Dane told her that it was fantastic and a delight to watch, which made her excited as she asked if he really meant it. He awkwardly smiled, wondering if he should point out her mistake. Deciding to do so, he explained that starting from her third form, she seemed to be taking half a step more than needed. Reflecting on her earlier forms, he added that this extra step caused her later movements to feel slightly misaligned. Layla was stunned in surprise at his observation. He noticed Layla's reaction and wondered if he had been a bit too blunt. Apologizing, he told her he didn't mean to upset her and explained that it had been a while since he had seen swordsmanship. Before he could finish, Layla swung her sword forward, shouting, "Okay." She continued, saying that it was what it was, and that his observation was the missing piece of the puzzle she had been searching for. As she thrust her sword forward again, she tripped and fell on him, hugging him in the process. Layla thanked him, but Dane, flustered, stammered as he asked her what she was doing. She leaned her cheek against his and excitedly told him he had a real eye for swordsmanship. She couldn't believe he had instantly spotted what she had been doing wrong for so long. Gratefully, she thanked him again, saying she would remember his advice. Dane, feeling suffocated, pushed her away, exclaiming that she was squeezing him too hard and asked her to put the sword away. Layla quickly did so, apologizing as she hid the sword behind her back, all the while smiling at him. Dane adjusted his coat, thinking that her sudden hug had caught him off guard. Just then, they heard people calling their names in concern, wondering where they were. Layla mentioned that it seemed people were looking for them, and Dane agreed that they should head back. After straightening themselves out, they left the training ground, where the searchers immediately spotted them. When they returned to the banquet, Dane's parents warmly congratulated him on his 7th birthday, and on his first Mana Core. His mother handed him her gift. He thanked his parents and opened the present, surprised to find a brooch with their family crest, much like the ones his sisters often showed off. Lily told him to treasure it, explaining that the brooch now served as a symbol of his status and honor within the family. The nobles began clapping, congratulating him on his birthday, and cheerfully shouting that he had truly earned the name of Saugers. They remarked that he would grow up to be a fine man like his father. Dane's parents smiled sweetly at him, filling him with warmth and love. It was the first time he had ever received such heartfelt applause from so many people. Suddenly, the entire mansion shook, and a loud rumble from outside caused everyone to panic. Guests began to ask frantically if it was an enemy invasion. Dane turned to his father in worry, but Arkan calmly told him there was nothing to fret over, looking up as he remarked that it was happening again, even though he had hoped for a quiet day. His mother, equally composed, asked if Arkan had a guess as to who it might be. Arkan sighed as he figured it out. Just then, the ceiling crackled with thunder magic, and a portal opened, filling the room with bright light. The nobles screamed in fear and panic, shouting in confusion as they wondered what was happening. But then, a figure emerged from the portal, spinning in midair before landing gracefully on the floor. She casually asked if anyone could check the time, then asked if she was right that her big sister wasn't late. The nobles, stunned, whispered among themselves, realizing that it was Arabella. They couldn't believe she had used teleportation magic, knowing that opening even a small gate required at least 5 chain magic ability. Everyone marveled at Arabella's genius, but Dane, irritated, just thought she was being loud and flashy as usual. Suddenly, another shock hit the nobles as they screamed in horror while looking out the window. In the sky, a large wyvern was flying, and they quickly realized that Claire was riding it. Claire looked down, remarking that she was just a step too late. She entered the banquet hall and walked to the center, with the nobles whispering in awe about how they had heard Claire was a genius summoner, but couldn't believe she was capable of controlling a wyvern at just 16 years old. Arabella greeted Claire, asking if she had arrived. Claire replied that she had, and the two sisters finally turned to Dane, sweetly wishing him a happy birthday together. His older sisters approached him with gifts, sincerely wishing him a happy birthday. He thanked them for coming all that way to celebrate with him. Arabella sweetly replied that, of course, they would come, and urged him to open his gifts, assuring him that he'd love them. Arkan, with a tearful smile, joked that his daughters only gave him a letter for his birthday, but they had gone to the trouble of preparing gifts for their younger brother, making Lily laugh. Dane opened Arabella's gift and asked, surprised, if it was a dimensional pouch. Arabella proudly confirmed it and told him that she had designed it herself. She explained that the subspace magic used was of the highest chain, crafted by her professor. He sincerely thanked her again, knowing how difficult it was to imbue subspace magic into an item. Arabella then picked up a ring and asked for his hand so she could put it on him. Dane thought to himself that creating an artifact capable of holding subspace magic was even more challenging. Arabella slipped the ring onto his finger, explaining that she had applied his genetic code to it, making it impossible for anyone else to use. It was the only one of its kind in the world. He admired the ring on his finger while his mother commented that, judging by the small wave of mana, Arabella must have used the highest grade magic stones. Arabella corrected her, explaining that if Dane imbued a bit of mana into the ring, it would activate the subspace, eliminating the need for a pouch. She added that Dane wouldn't have to deal with the hassle of opening and closing a pouch ever again. Realizing how valuable the gift was, Dane thanked Arabella once more, understanding that only wealthy commanders or magicians born into noble families typically use such items. He then imbued mana into the ring, and, as Arabella explained that the ring would grow with him, he managed to open the subspace. Arkan and the banquet guests were in disbelief. Arabella, equally astonished, shouted that Dane really was a genius for opening it even faster than she had. Everyone praised him for his incredible talent, and Arkan remarked that Dane might have both a mana core and a magic circle. Claire then presented her gift, asking him to open it. He immediately did so and thanked Claire, but was shocked to find an egg inside the box. Confused, he picked it up and asked Claire why there was an egg. Claire, stuttering slightly, explained that it wasn't just any egg, and that he needed to be careful with it. Still puzzled, he asked her what it was. His parents and Arabella looked equally confused, but Claire whispered to him that it was a familiar. She told him that while attempting to summon Decarin once, the egg appeared instead. She admitted that she didn't know what kind of summon would come from it, but she did know that it was incredibly precious. Dane stared at the egg, recalling that familiars, unlike summons, were a distinct entity. Once summoned, a familiar could remain in the world permanently, unlike regular summons. Claire whispered that no one else knew about the egg except him, and asked him to keep it a secret until it hatched. Dane agreed, promising to keep it confidential. Arabella, noticing them whispering, loudly asked why they were taking so long and what they were discussing. Claire leaned in and whispered to Dane that even she didn't know when the egg would hatch, but he needed to pour mana into it every day, once in the morning and once in the evening, so it would recognize him as its master. Dane replied that he would make sure to do so. His mother laughed, commenting on how incredible his sister's gifts were, and asked if it wasn't nice to have them back. Dane agreed, saying he liked it very much. Arkan then called his daughters over, expressing his happiness that they were able to attend despite originally saying they couldn't. He gently reminded them to greet their parents as well. Arabella, realizing she had been so focused on giving Dane her gift, finally noticed their father and asked how he had been, apologizing for her earlier distraction. Arkan embraced them both, assuring them it was all right. He warmly noted that they looked healthy and had made the effort to come all the way for their younger brother's celebration. He encouraged them to rest well, and they both nodded in agreement. As the family enjoyed their reunion, Dane noticed Layla standing off to the side, watching with a pained expression. Sensing her gaze, he glanced at her just as she began to walk away, wondering why she looked so lonely and if she was leaving. The next day, Thermion walked alone in the garden, reflecting on how remarkable Arabella had proven to be. She had exceeded his already high expectations. As the top magician at the academy, Arabella would be an exceptional match for his son, the best swordsman there. Thermion knew that uniting their two houses would create a faction so powerful that even the imperial family would find it difficult to challenge. Such an alliance would ensure that no one could threaten his house or his children. He resolved to mention the idea of an engagement between their eldest children during his conversations later that day. Thermion's thoughts were interrupted by a sound from the training ground. Curious, he wondered who could be training so early in the morning. Meanwhile, in the training ground, Dane was practicing diligently with his spear. He rolled the spear in his hands, familiarizing himself with its weight and balance. After positioning himself, he focused, setting his gaze forward and moving with deliberate steps. He swung the spear using various techniques at impressive speed, then ran forward, rolling the spear with fluid motion before stopping and delivering rapid thrusts into the air with precision. Thermion, observing from a distance, quickly realized it was the youngest son of the Saugers family. He watched in amazement as Dane displayed incredible skill, his movements far beyond what would be expected from a boy of 7. Thermion was particularly struck by the technical proficiency in Dane's simple spear thrusts, which were executed at a level that even seasoned spearmen on the battlefield could still learn from. He couldn't help but wonder how a child so young could possess such mastery. Recalling rumors about Dane's extraordinary talent even as a baby, Thermion had once dismissed them as exaggerations. But now he realized they were true. As Dane widened his stance, Thermion noticed his footwork and posture resembled that of a swordsman. In disbelief, he began to wonder if Dane had also begun studying swordsmanship at such a young age. Dane suddenly stopped and, while raising his spear, called out to whoever was watching, indicating he had sensed Thermion's presence. Realizing he had been discovered, Thermion stepped out, his mind lingering on how familiar Dane's movements had felt. Entering the training ground, Thermion apologized for watching unnoticed. Dane, upon recognizing the Duke, greeted him respectfully, though he still harbored anger from their past encounter. Nevertheless, as the youngest son of the Saugers family, he maintained his composure and offered the Duke a proper, courteous greeting. Thermion tells him that he was mesmerized by the sight of Saugers' new rising star training that early morning and asks for forgiveness for his earlier mistake. He replies that he has already been forgiven, which surprises Thermion, making him think the young man has guts. Thermion then notices him and wonders how his body isn't trembling, despite training for so long. He recalls that he hadn't formed his man-core at that age either. Thermion then compliments his stabbing attack, calling it excellent and noting that he has clearly inherited Arkan's talent. Pointing to his spear, the young man responds that his spear had been painstakingly prepared for him by his father. He respectfully bows and expresses gratitude that Thermion recognized his spear, which makes Thermion smile, knowing it was the perfect response. This reminds him that his own son, when young, also possessed great skill and manners, though not to the same extent as this boy. Thermion then wonders if he should consider arranging a marriage on that side as well. Thermion mentions that his daughter Layla has also been training in swordsmanship and suggests that, since they are of similar age, they could become good friends once they enter the academy. The Dane replies that he will make sure to get along with her. Laughing, Thermion praises his forthrightness and remarks that he seems to have bothered him enough during his training. As Thermion turns to leave, he suddenly remembers something and asks if the young man has trained in swordsmanship. This question catches him off guard, and he realizes his habits had surfaced without him noticing. He isn't surprised that Thermion recognized it immediately. He replies that he hasn't trained in swordsmanship, though he has read textbooks on basic techniques. He reiterates that he has never trained in it formally. Thermion acknowledges his answer but thinks it odd, feeling as though he sensed something raw and battle-hardened in the young man. Yet, as he sees him smiling, Thermion dismisses the thought, reasoning that Dane is just a child. Thermion then comments that he has spent too much time on their simple walk and says he will see him later. Dane replies respectfully and wishes Thermion a safe journey back. Before departing, Thermion tells him that if he ever visits the capital, he should seek him out, as he wishes to repay the hospitality shown to him at the Count's castle and has become personally interested in him. Dane respectfully promises to visit. As Thermion leaves, the Dane smiles, wondering if Thermion remembers him, thinking that the idea of defeating someone who once defeated him excites him. He vows to prepare step by step, certain that one day he will succeed in defeating Thermion in this lifetime. A moment later, someone calls out to him, telling him it's time to return. He sees it's Herman and asks if he had been waiting for him. Herman replies that his duty is always to attend to his needs from the shadows. Herman then hands him a towel, and he thanks him, briefly considering whether Herman should receive training in assassination or stealth, as he seems talented enough. He then asks Herman if he was right in guessing that everyone is busy. Herman confirms, saying preparations for the second banquet are underway and that many nobles have already begun to arrive, as it would be difficult for over 30 noble families to arrive on the exact date. Daneman then recalls something and asks about his sisters. Herman replies that they opened a teleporter gate together and left for the academy, explaining they had no choice due to upcoming midterm exams. Dane expresses some disappointment but acknowledges it is what it is and suggests they return. Herman immediately agrees, and Dane thinks to himself that, when he has time, he should take a look at the gifts his sisters gave him. Later, the butler and his maid prepared him for the second banquet. He then went out to greet the attending nobles, engaging them in conversation, entertaining them, and dining with them. As more nobles arrived, he welcomed them as well. Hours later, he stepped out of the garden, feeling exhausted, reflecting on how tiring the life of a noble can be. He knew that his schedule was more hectic than usual due to his birthday, but he was glad to find some peace in the garden. He noticed how beautifully the gardener had cultivated the flowers, and felt a strange sense of calm as he admired them. He remembered Arabella once saying that flowers contain the most mana in nature, so he bent down to examine them more closely, thinking that he had enough time to analyze their mana. He closed his eyes to focus and began analyzing the flower's mana. Despite training as much as he could, he had not noticed any significant development in his magic or summoning abilities, leaving him unsure of what to prioritize. After several minutes, he opened his eyes, musing that having too many talents can be troublesome. He was surprised to see the flower's mana clearly before him and couldn't believe that such a small flower contained such a powerful, rushing flow of energy. He knew that if someone could harness the mana flow of nature and make it their own, it could settle within their body and form a magic circle. He noticed that his body's mana affinity was tremendous and that he could see something most people could only sense with their sixth sense. Staring at the mana swirling in his hand, he smiled, knowing that what was once a faint glimpse had now become much clearer. Suddenly, as he was about to grasp the mana, it shattered on its own, leaving him surprised and confused about what had just happened. Just then, he overheard a voice complaining that his father was too busy talking to the other nobles, leaving them completely ignored even though they had just arrived. The voice, belonging to a man, suggested to the boy with him that they should simply show their faces and then return to their rooms, as they had done last time. The boy hesitated, asking his older brother if they were allowed to do that. The man, growing irritated, kicked the flowers, destroying them, and angrily shouted that it wasn't their birthday, so why would the Sagras family's young master care? The boy then mentioned that he thought they had lost their way again, to which the man grumbled about why the garden was so unnecessarily large. Just then, the boy noticed him and pointed him out to the man, who sarcastically asked if he had also gotten lost. The man then loudly called out to him, asking if he was a servant based on his attire. When Dane turned to face them, the man, accompanied by the boy, ordered him to lead them to the exit. Anger surged through him as he rushed toward them, shouting for them to get off the flower bed immediately. He asked if they couldn't see what they were trampling under their shoes. The man, irritated, asked what he was talking about and whether he was really shouting at them over some grass. He then questioned why they were ruining the flower bed instead of using the path. The man arrogantly replied that he was being quite bold for someone so small, and demanded to know if he had any idea who they were. The young man coolly responded that they were the ones trampling the flower bed. The man, enraged, reached for him, angrily demanding to know who he thought he was talking to and calling him a servant. Grabbing his shirt, the man shouted that they were the sons of Count Tyron, a guest of the castle. This surprised the young man as he recalled that Count Tyron was the noble he had captured after defeating him on the battlefield, a truly irritating man. It seemed the sons took after their father. The man raised his fist, shouting that even though this was the southern countryside, surely he had heard of House Tyron, which was famous in the capital. The boy beside him laughed. The man continued to shout that their house could make someone like him disappear without a trace, so he should watch his words. Dane, realizing that reasoning with him was pointless, braced himself. The man swung his fist at him, shouting in disbelief at the idea that a mere servant dared to look at them in such a way. Just before the punch landed, the young man swiftly closed the distance, surprising the man. He headbutted him, striking him squarely on the nose, causing the boy to shout in concern for his older brother. The man stumbled backward, blood pouring from his nose, while the boy nervously asked if he was all right. Enraged, the man shouted that Dane was insane, but Dane simply smiled, challenging him to try again if he dared. The man shouted that he had lost his mind and was looking for trouble. Meanwhile, the younger boy, worried, urged his big brother to tend to his bleeding nose, but the man barked at him to stay put. Ignoring the concern, the man charged forward, but Dane remained calm, waiting for the attack. As the man swung a punch, Dane swiftly jumped back, dodging it. When the man followed up with another punch aimed at his face, Dane ducked, evading it easily. Frustrated, the man yelled, calling him a slippery little rat. The man attempted another series of attacks, but Dane dodged each one effortlessly. Observing the man's movements, Dane noted that his footwork didn't resemble that of someone trained in weaponry. He began to wonder whether the man was a mage or perhaps a summoner. Despite the boy's repeated calls for his brother to stop, the man, clearly exasperated, kept throwing punches, shouting that Dane was too fast to catch. Dane hopped back twice more, continuing to evade the man's attacks, all the while recalling the flow of magic he had noticed earlier. He pondered whether he could compress that magical energy into a physical form and harness it. Deciding to test the idea, Dane began gathering the magic into his palm. Within moments, he had concentrated the magic power, and the younger boy gasped in shock as Dane hurled it at his brother, knocking the man to the ground with a pained scream. The boy rushed over to check on his brother, but Dane's only concern was the destruction of the flower bed. The man, enraged and cursing, stood up, incredulous that Dane could use magic. Furious, the man demanded to know who Dane was. The younger boy pleaded for his brother to stop, fearing something worse might happen. But the man, filled with rage, pushed his brother aside, declaring his intent to kill. The man then activated his talent, summoning his power while shouting an incantation. Dane was momentarily surprised, realizing that the man was a summoner. A portal opened in midair, and from it emerged a wolf-like beast. The wolf growled menacingly, and the man laughed, boasting about his summon, Genpu, before commanding the beast to tear Dane apart. Despite the threat, Dane remained calm, unimpressed by Genpu, thinking it was a mere wolf-like summon and rather lacking in comparison to his sister Claire's ability to summon a wyvern. Genpu lunged at Dane, with Digron ordering it to rip out his throat. However, as the wolf met Dane's gaze, it abruptly halted, its color shifting to blue. To the shock of the Tyran brothers, Genpu turned on them, growling as if they were its enemies. The beast then bowed its head and approached Dane gently, wagging its tail, which left Digron in disbelief. He shouted, demanding to know what was happening and why Genpu wasn't obeying him. The younger brother, just as confused, asked what Dane had done. Dane, unfazed, simply patted Genpu, praising it for being a good boy. He was surprised by how soft the wolf felt to him and wondered how this could have happened. He then recalled how even Claire's summons were always friendly toward him, though he had assumed it was due to their shared bloodline. In this case, there was no such connection, leading him to speculate that perhaps he had a naturally high favorability with summoned creatures, or perhaps Digron's own favorability with Genpu had hit rock bottom. Digron, in disbelief, shouted that it made no sense, a summon couldn't betray its master. Dane, remaining calm, asked if Digron wanted to continue. Infuriated, Digron yelled back, but his younger brother, with tears in his eyes, begged him to stop, admitting that they had already lost. Stuttering in frustration, Digron ordered his brother to be quiet, declaring that he would cancel the summon. Just then, the boy, in embarrassment, shyly confessed that he had wet himself. Digron looked at his little brother and confirmed the embarrassing truth. Denar had indeed peed in his shorts. Mortified, Digron shouts at him, and Dane tells them that for their information, that the bathhouse was on basement level 1 of the main castle. Grabbing Denar's hand, Digron turned to leave but, in anger, shouted back at Dane that he'd return soon. They left, leaving Dane in disbelief as he realized that Digron had forgotten to take his summon with him. As the sun began to set, Dane looked at his palm, reflecting on how simple the entire process had been. It reminded him of what his sister Claire had taught him. By carefully overriding the faint magical link between Digron and Genpu with his own, Genpu had connected to him. He couldn't believe it, without ever having performed a formal summoning. He had succeeded in controlling a summon, all because of his high favorability with such creatures. Suddenly, a voice interrupted his thoughts, asking if he was the brat who had bullied someone's kids. Startled, Dane turned to see Digron, this time accompanied by his father, who was pointing at him. Frustration welled up in Dane as he realized Digron had escalated the situation even further. Digron complained to his father, accusing Dane of not only bullying him and Denar but also canceling his link with Genpu. Count Tyran, Mogard Tyran, then introduced himself, the head of the Tyran family and one of the capital's great nobles. With an air of arrogance, Mogard confronted Dane, asking if he was the one responsible for his son's current state and for taking Digron's summon. Dane replied simply, confirming that it was him. As Mogard stood before him, Dane couldn't help but notice that the Count had grown fatter since the time he had captured him as a prisoner in the past. It was a sign that peace had been kind to the man. Mogard's anger flared as he explained that, as invited guests, he had initially planned to let the incident pass, but it was now something he could not overlook. He demanded to know why Dane was alone in such a place and ordered him to reveal his identity. Sighing in frustration, Dane introduced himself as Dane Saugers, the youngest son of Arkan Saugers, the Lord of the South and head of the Saugers family. Shock washed over both Mogard and Digron as they realized who they had been dealing with. They couldn't believe that the boy standing before them was Dane Saugers. Mogard realized the situation had taken an unexpected turn. He recalled being taken prisoner by Argric, but despite not achieving much during the war, Mogard now saw an opportunity to turn the situation to his advantage. He planned to hold Count Saugers responsible for this incident, using it as a pretext to demand mining rights. In his mind, the nobles who once looked down on him would soon be bowing to him. Mogard then acknowledged Dane's birthday, and Dane calmly confirmed it. Internally, Mogard seethed, thinking Dane was an arrogant brat and reminding himself that he hadn't traveled to the southern lands just to celebrate a birthday. Grabbing Digron's shoulder, Mogard asked his son what he planned to do about the situation. Mogard then accused Dane of injuring his son, a guest, and stealing his summon, which he framed as a grave crime. Digron shouted in agreement, claiming that today would be Dane's last. Mogard declared that he would speak with Count Saugers directly and hold Arkan accountable. Dane remained calm, silently observing them. He could easily see through Mogard's transparent schemes. Dane replied that he understood but insisted on an apology before anything else. Mogard, taken aback, angrily demanded to know what Dane meant by an apology, calling it impudence. Dane calmly explained that while it was true he had hit Digron and hurt him, it was in self-defense after being threatened. Furthermore, he clarified that he hadn't stolen the summon. Genpu had chosen to follow him of its own accord. Digron shouted that there was no way Genpu would do that, insisting Dane was lying. Mogard, however, remembered that Claire Saugers was a renowned summoner, and began to realize how it could have happened. He suspected that Claire had taught Dane how to sever the link between a summon and its master. Mogard, still trying to maintain control of the situation, conceded that even if what Dane said was true, it was still a serious matter to lose a summon. He questioned whether Dane truly expected an apology. Dane confirmed that he did. Digron, enraged, demanded to know who Dane thought he was, acting so arrogantly. Mogard also accused Dane of disrespecting his elders by talking back. Mogard, now irritated to the point of physical discomfort, decided it was time to escalate the situation further. He told Dane they would go see what Count Saugers had to say about the matter, clearly eager to bring this before Arkan. Suddenly, Arkan and Thermion appeared, and Arkan asked Mogard if he had been looking for him. Both Mogard and Digron were visibly shocked to see the two powerful men arrive. Digron, stammering, quickly concocted a story. He claimed that he and his younger brother had gotten lost in the garden and had asked Dane to guide them. As Digron continued his side of the story, Dane observed his father, Arkan. He knew that while Arkan cared deeply for his family, he was not one to be biased. Arkan had a keen sense of justice, even when dealing with outsiders, and could always tell right from wrong. Dane listened as Digron lied effortlessly, claiming that Dane had suddenly headbutted him and mocked him with strange techniques. Digron went on to say that he had summoned Genpu merely to scare Dane, but that Dane had stolen his summon and tried to attack him. Dane couldn't believe how easily Digron could lie with a straight face, and he silently anticipated the consequences awaiting Digron. Mogard, adopting a serious tone, told Arkan that he had only intended to warn Dane, but he couldn't overlook the theft of a summon as it was a serious offense. Arkan responded calmly, stating that they couldn't draw conclusions after hearing only one side of the story. He explained that he wanted to hear Dane's account and assess the situation in its entirety. He then asked Mogard if he was comfortable with this approach, adding that if there were concerns about Arkan's impartiality, Duke Thermion could also give his opinion. Thermion agreed, telling them that if his involvement was necessary, he would ensure they handled the matter fairly. Mogard clenched his jaw in frustration, knowing that Thermion's involvement would only complicate matters. He had a bad feeling about how things were unfolding. Arkan ordered Dane to explain himself, and Dane, thinking it would be straightforward enough, recounted the incident. He admitted that some of what Digron said was true, but added that Digron had carelessly trampled on their carefully tended flower bed. When Dane had asked Digron to leave, it was Digron who had gotten angry and grabbed him by the collar. This revelation shocked Mogard and Digron, who immediately stammered, shouting that it was a lie. Arkan calmly instructed Dane to continue. Dane went on, saying that when Digron summoned Genpu, the command was clearly to kill him. He emphasized that he hadn't stolen Digron's summon. Genpu had come to him willingly, recognizing his goodwill. Thermion was taken aback, surprised that a 7-year-old could explain the situation so eloquently. Dane confidently reiterated to Arkan that he never stole Digron's summon. Mogard, furious, shouted that it was impossible. He insisted that no summon would ever submit to someone who wasn't its master unless some secret technique was involved. Dane explained that he had a natural affinity for summons and that if a summon wasn't closely bonded with its master, it could submit to someone like him. Mogard scoffed at the idea, but Arkin asked if it was truly possible, to which Dane confirmed that it was. Mogard, unwilling to believe it, asked Arkin if he really expected them to accept such an explanation. He pointed out that both sides had told different stories, and that it was difficult to determine the truth. Thermion, unexpectedly siding with Dane, suggested that they prove it by summoning Genpu again. Mogard, shocked, couldn't believe that Thermion was now actively getting involved. Arkin then gently asked Dane if he could prove his claim. Dane confidently agreed. Mogard turned to glare at Digron, who panicked, unsure of what to do, knowing he could no longer summon Genpu. Mogard, noticing his son's hesitation, demanded to know what was wrong and ordered Digron to summon Genpu. In a panic, Digron shouted that he couldn't. This infuriated Mogard, who shouted again, asking how it was possible that Digron suddenly couldn't summon something he had done countless times. Dane smiled at their expressions, fully aware that he had severed the connection between Digron and Genpu, making it impossible for Digron to summon the creature. He then explained to Arkin that he could summon Genpu himself but would need Digron's summoning sign to do so. Digron, outraged, yelled that this was nonsense and that a summoner's unique code was engraved into the sign, making it impossible for someone else to use. Arkin, however, calmly reasoned with Digron, explaining that if what Dane said was true, using the sign shouldn't work. He asked what harm there was in trying, as it would either prove or disprove Dane's claim. Knowing that Arkin's logic was sound, Digron had no choice but to comply. Mogard, furious, ordered his son to hand over the sign immediately, despite Digron's tearful reluctance. Dane took the sign and infused it with his mana. Summoning signs were typically bound to a specific summoner, making them impossible to use by others. However, because Genpu had already bonded with Dane, the sign was now merely a tool. Confident in his connection with the summon, Dane activated the sign. A portal opened, and Genpu emerged, sweetly licking Dane's face. Both Arkin and Thermion were shocked. Stammering in disbelief, Digron turned to Mogard, asking how Genpu could now belong to Dane. Mogard, equally stunned, muttered that it was impossible. Meanwhile, Thermion, clearly impressed, asked Arkin if he had said that Dane was training in spearmanship. Arkin confirmed, adding that he wasn't sure what had led to this development. As Dane apologized to Genpu for summoning it for this display and thanked it for appearing, Mogard stood horrified, realizing that the situation had spiraled into a disaster. Arkin then asked Mogard how they should proceed now that Dane had proven his claim. He also asked Mogard if he would acknowledge the truth, noting that it seemed clear that Dane had been honest. Mogard, visibly uncomfortable, reluctantly admitted that they had been mistaken in thinking their summon had been stolen. He awkwardly tried to explain that Digron hadn't intended to kill Dane, turning to his son to confirm. Digron, still in shock, hurriedly agreed, claiming that he had only meant to scare Dane and had no real intention of killing him. Mogard desperately tried to smooth things over, insisting that Digron hadn't truly meant harm, but both Arkin and Thermion remained silent. Dane clenched his fists in anger, furious that Digron continued to make excuses even now. Just as tensions were mounting, a voice interrupted them, shouting that it wasn't true. Everyone turned in shock to see Layla standing there, much to their astonishment. Thermion panicked when he saw his daughter and immediately asked what had brought her there. Layla explained that she had heard their voices while on her walk. She greeted both Saugars and Tyron, to which Mogard nodded, still wondering if this girl was indeed Thermion's daughter. Arkin, clearly irritated, asked her to clarify what she meant by saying Digron had lied. Layla explained that she had overheard their conversation earlier, causing Digron to panic, realizing she might have heard everything. Arkin calmly asked Layla to recount exactly what she had overheard. She began to relay the events, and though Dane hadn't expected it, he felt grateful for her presence, as it made everything proceed much more smoothly. A moment later, Mogard, frustrated, shouted at Digron, demanding to know what he was doing and ordering him to apologize immediately. Stammering, Digron reluctantly apologized to Arkin, admitting he had been wrong. However, Arkin told him that the apology wasn't for him, it was for his son. Mogard, trying to salvage the situation, quickly agreed and pushed Digron forward, ordering him to apologize to Dane. Though Digron resented it, he stepped closer to Dane and stammered out an apology with a clenched jaw. Dane observed Digron's forced apology and reflected on whether it really counted when they were only apologizing because they had no other choice after a third-party witness came forward. He didn't particularly want to accept it, but based on his past experiences, he knew that showing generosity would be more beneficial. With that in mind, he told Digron that he accepted the apology. Digron looked relieved, quickly thanking him, and Mogard sighed in relief, sensing the ordeal was nearly over. Thermion, observing Dane's calm demeanor, noted to himself that Dane could have been stubborn, especially since the other party was clearly in the wrong. Arkin then stated that they could consider the argument settled, as Dane had accepted the apology. However, he added that he had no intention of letting the incident go completely unpunished, as Digron had attempted to kill his son using a summon. Mogard tried to offer an explanation, but Arkan cut him off, saying he didn't want to hear any more excuses. He coldly ordered Mogard to take his family and leave the castle. Mogard was taken aback, unable to believe what Arkan was saying. Panic set in as Mogard realized that being expelled from the castle would mean his efforts had been for nothing. Desperate, Mogard approached Arkan and grabbed his arm, begging for forgiveness and saying he would do anything Arkan asked. But Arkan shook him off, telling him he had no use for him. Arkan then warned Mogard that soldiers would escort them to their room and walked away with Dane, calling for Thermion to follow. Thermion, nodding in agreement, grabbed Layla and left with them. Dane glanced back, thinking that the Tyrant family was only reaping what they had sown, and realized just how intimidating his father could be when angry. When they reached the front of the mansion, Thermion asked Dane if it was true that he had defeated Digron using a mana bullet, to which Dane confirmed. Thermion turned to Arkan, remarking how outstanding Dane was, having talents in spearmanship, summoning, and magic, and wondering if history had ever seen such talent. Arkan, with pride, acknowledged his son's exceptional abilities. Layla, intrigued, asked Dane if he truly possessed those talents, and he nodded. Thermion added that not only was Dane talented, but he also remained calm under pressure. Unlike most children who would get agitated and insist they were right in such situations, Dane had handled everything with maturity. Thermion expressed confidence that Dane would grow up to be an extraordinary man. Arkan, still proud but cautious, replied that while he hoped for that, it was too early to tell, and they would have to wait until Dane grew up fully. He patted his son's head affectionately. Arkan then turned to Layla and sincerely thanked her, explaining that today's situation had been resolved peacefully thanks to her testimony. Without it, things could have gotten much uglier. Thermion, noticing Arkan's praise of his daughter, excitedly suggested that since Layla had been so helpful, they should discuss the possibility of marriage between her and Dane. Arkan was caught off guard, shocked by the sudden suggestion, and wondered if Thermion seriously wanted Dane to marry his daughter. Trying to change the subject, Arkan suddenly remarked on how late it was and said it was nearly time for the banquet. Without waiting for a response, he quickly ran off, shouting back to the group that he had to get ready. Thermion, stunned, called after him, trying to stop him from escaping the conversation. But Arkan was already out of sight. Left standing, Thermion then turned to Layla and Dane, telling them to take their time heading back before rushing off to chase after Arkan, insisting that they needed to talk. The two children stood there, confused and stunned by the sudden turn of events. Layla, watching her father chase after Arkan, commented to Dane that there was no stopping him once he had an idea in his head. She then asked him why Digron's summon had ignored its master and obeyed him instead. Layla explained that she had seen many famous summoners duel in the capital but had never witnessed anything like that. Dane, unsure himself, replied that it had just kind of happened. Pouting, Layla accused him of hiding something, saying it wasn't fair since she had helped him. Confused, Dane asked what she meant by not fair and reminded her that he had also helped her with her swordsmanship. Realizing he was right, Layla agreed. Dane, acknowledging that Layla had been a big help, suggested that they could consider it even. They had each helped the other once, and maybe they could help each other again in the future. Layla, amazed by the idea, immediately wanted to take advantage of the offer. Dane, realizing how impatient she was, hesitated before stammering and asking what exactly she wanted. Layla eagerly requested that he teach her how to use a mana bullet. Surprised, Dane asked why she was interested in that. Layla explained that she wanted to grow stronger quickly, aiming to create at least 2 mana cores before entering the academy. Dane wondered why she was in such a hurry, considering her young age, and speculated that her family might be strict. Layla revealed that her motivation came from a desire to make her mother proud. Her mother, who loved her deeply, would be thrilled if she grew stronger. Dane remembered hearing adults mention that Countess Thermion had been bedridden. Feeling sympathetic, Dane agreed to help her, telling Layla that with such a reason, he couldn't refuse. Layla, overjoyed, asked if he truly meant it and suggested they start tomorrow. She enthusiastically assured him she'd be ready but even offered to begin that very night. Dane, slightly overwhelmed, agreed, telling her to do as she pleased since learning a mana bullet shouldn't be too difficult once she understood the flow of magic. Layla excitedly declared how thrilled she was and then asked what his request was, as it was now his turn to ask for something in return. Dane looked at her thoughtfully, considering what he wanted. Later, at the banquet, the nobles whispered among themselves about Mogard's sudden expulsion from the castle, speculating about what had happened. They discussed rumors that Mogard's eldest son, Digron, had caused some sort of incident, picking a fight with the youngest master, Dane, and getting taught a lesson in return. The nobles expressed frustration that the Tyrant family had traveled all the way there only to cause trouble. Some whispered that there were also rumors about Dane being an outstanding summoner, with others asking if this meant the Saugers family would now become a prestigious house of summoners. However, one noble corrected them, stating that Dane was also rumored to use magic, leaving everyone astonished and questioning if such a thing was even possible. Moments later, a nobleman approached Dane, recognizing him from the rumors. rumors. Introducing himself as Baron Opent, the man asked if Dane knew anything about the Opent territory in the east. Dane responded that he had heard of it, specifically that the region was famous for its grilled trout and sapphires. Baron Opent, pleased, called Dane a bright young man, proudly stating that the trout and sapphires from his territory were the best on the continent. Without warning, the Baron nudged a little girl forward, commenting that he had heard of Dane's many talents and guessed the rumors were true. At any rate, he had brought his daughter along and almost introduced her too late. He then instructed his daughter to greet Dane properly. The little girl stepped closer, leaving Dane wondering what was happening. She introduced herself as Sylvia Opent, the daughter of Baron Opent, to which Dane, feeling awkward, greeted her back and introduced himself. Sylvia suddenly dashed closer and, in a whisper, asked Dane if it was true that he would inherit the Sagar's house one day. Confused, Dane replied that he wasn't sure. Undeterred, she shook his hand and told him not to feign ignorance, as she had heard that he was talented in many ways. She added that he should take care of her because it was possible they could become family in the future. Caught off guard, Dane stammered and agreed, telling her to take care of him as well, though he was left wondering why kids these days were so direct and forward. Suddenly, Layla spotted Dane holding Sylvia's hand and was shocked. Confused by Layla's reaction, Dane glanced at Sylvia, who was equally surprised to see Layla. Layla glared at Dane and demanded to know who the girl was. Unable to respond right away, Dane was relieved when Sylvia politely greeted Layla and introduced herself as Sylvia Opent, the eldest daughter of Baron Opent. Layla, clearly upset, managed to maintain her composure and replied that it was nice to meet her. However, Dane could sense the tension between the two girls, their smiles masking thinly veiled anger. The familiar feeling of hostility reminded him of how his older sisters used to glare at each other, making him think once again that girls could be scary. Layla then grabbed Dane's hand tightly, apologizing to Sylvia for taking him away. She mentioned that they had an appointment and asked Dane to confirm. Playing along, he pretended to suddenly remember and told Sylvia that they would catch up later. Sylvia, forcing a smile, agreed, but Dane could tell she wasn't happy. As they walked away, Sylvia was left wondering if Layla was claiming Dane for herself. After all, Layla was the daughter of the powerful Duke Thermion, second only to the Emperor, while Sylvia, the daughter of a baron, was no match for her. Once they were away from the banquet, Layla asked how Dane and Sylvia had met and whether Sylvia was someone he might get engaged to. Dane immediately clarified that it wasn't like that, they had just exchanged greetings. Layla's eyes lit up with relief as she excitedly asked if he really meant it. He reassured her, and she smiled brightly, clearly pleased. A little later, they arrived at an abandoned mansion. Dane proudly told Layla that this was his secret spot, a place only he knew about. Layla looked around in awe, amazed that such a place existed within the castle grounds. She marveled at how they could train there without anyone bothering them. As they reached the middle of the mansion, Layla's excitement grew as she explored the area. She expressed her surprise at finding such a hidden place and remarked how no one would know if they practiced there. Dane agreed, noting that it was an ideal spot for training. He then asked if she had ever felt mana before. Layla replied that she had sensed it a little but hadn't formed a mana core yet, although she had tried to intake mana by breathing it in. Dane realized she wasn't at the stage of emitting mana yet, recalling how he had naturally learned it on the battlefield, which made him wonder if her ducal family had taught her anything similar. He suggested they start with something simple, telling her that she needed to first feel the mana she was taking into her body. When Layla asked if he meant feeling it within her, he confirmed, explaining that before she could expel mana from her body, she needed to learn how to control it inside. He emphasized that imagination was key. Dane instructed her to close her eyes and visualize the mana swirling within her, like blood circulating through her veins. Layla agreed to try, but Dane could tell from her expression that she didn't fully understand. She lowered her arms, spread her legs, and closed her eyes, trying to focus on the task as Dane explained that this exercise would form the foundation for everything she could do with mana. It was the very basics, and he was confident she could manage it. Layla attempted to picture the mana whirling inside her body, concentrating hard, but after a moment, she gave up and told Dane that it wasn't working. He reassured her that it was perfectly normal for a first attempt, even if it seemed simple, and encouraged her to try again, focusing even harder this time. At a little distance, Arkan was hidden, watching his son, feeling proud that even at such a young age, Dane was already teaching someone. He thought to himself that Dane was growing up so fast. Suddenly, Thermion appeared behind him, startling Arkan. Whispering, Arkan told him he had nearly scared him to death. Thermion chuckled, saying there was no need to be so surprised and asked if there was a secret rendezvous going on between a couple. Arkan, still flustered, asked what he meant by a couple and how Thermion had gotten there. Thermion teased him, asking if he had intruded and mentioning that Arkan's stealth skills were sloppy, especially considering his wife was the legendary assassin of the Empire. Arkan defended himself, saying he did his best in his own way. Thermion, still amused, warned that if the lord of the castle was caught spying on others, it wouldn't reflect well. Arkan, dismissing the idea of peeping, explained that he was merely following his son, which surprised Thermion. Thermion then admitted he had done the same, following his daughter. Arkan, shaking his head, remarked that they were both hopeless parents, to which Thermion simply responded with a laugh, saying it was something Arkan had just now figured out. He asked to take a look, and both fathers peeked at their children. Dane was showing Layla his magic pouch, and she asked if he had a dimensional pouch like that. Dane explained that his eldest sister, Arabella, had made it and recently gifted it to him. Layla expressed her envy, commenting that her older brothers had stopped paying attention to her after they entered the academy. Dane then took out a mirror from the pouch, which puzzled Layla. When she asked why, he explained that it might help her visualize her mana flow more clearly. He encouraged her to stand in front of the mirror to get a full view of herself. Layla agreed, positioning herself in front of the mirror, taking the task seriously as she closed her eyes and tried to focus. Watching this, Thermion quietly remarked that Layla seemed to have taken a liking to Dane. Arkan asked if it really seemed that way, and Thermion confirmed, noting that it was rare for Layla to open up like she had. Arkan asked if something had happened to her, mentioning that Layla seemed like a bright child. Thermion's tone turned serious as he explained that while Layla was cheerful on the outside, it wasn't the same on the inside. After her brothers left for the academy, her mother had fallen bedridden, and they hadn't been able to spend time together like they used to. This had made it difficult for Layla to open up to others. Arkan, understanding the situation, gently questioned why Thermion acted so cold toward his own daughter. Thermion admitted that he had been doing it deliberately. When he raised his sons, he showered them with too much attention, which had spoiled them. Arkan advised him not to assume Layla would be like her brothers, warning that she could be hurt by that distance. As they spoke, they noticed Layla succeeding in whirling her mana inside her body, her face lighting up with excitement. Arkan remarked that it was no wonder Layla had sought Dane's help instead. Thermion, smiling, commented that Arkan still nagged like he did in the old days, which surprised Arkan, who asked when he had ever done that. Thermion then shifted the conversation, asking if Arkan was planning to send Dane to the capital and whether he would let Dane stay at the ducal castle while he was there. Arkan stayed silent for a moment, deep in thought, until they heard Layla excitedly tell Dane that she had done it. Arkan finally answered Thermion, saying that he would let Dane make the decision, just as he had with his daughters, Arabella and Claire. If Dane chose to go to the capital, Arkan would ensure his wishes were respected. Thermion responded that it would be nice if Dane stopped by while he was there. Arkan, with a playful grin, asked if Thermion just wanted to spar with him all day. Thermion laughed, teasing Arkan by saying he had grown sharper over the years. Meanwhile, high up in an old tree, Lily watched the two men. She wondered where they had disappeared to and why they were behaving so sneakily. With a smile, she recognized the love they had for their children, which sometimes led them to act in strange ways. Deciding to let them continue, she chose to pretend she hadn't seen anything, all the while watching them from a distance as they spied on their children. A moment later, Dane and Layla emerged from the abandoned mansion. Layla thanked him for helping her, adding that she thought he was a real genius. She admitted that she had often been called a genius herself, but compared to him, she didn't feel like much. Dane looked around and reassured her, saying that it was only the beginning and that she would definitely grow stronger too. As they spoke, he realized that Arkan and Thermion had quietly left. Layla then asked if he was planning to go to the academy, mentioning that it was where all the Empire's geniuses gathered. Dane replied that he wasn't sure yet and questioned whether he really needed to go, considering how strong he could become just by training on his own. She immediately called him an idiot, explaining that studying wasn't everything. The academy was where noble factions were formed. Layla emphasized that if you wanted to build connections from a young age, the academy was essential. Dane was impressed by how much Layla, despite being only 7 years old, seemed to understand about the world. He acknowledged her point but told her that he wasn't interested in going just yet. There were still many books in the library he hadn't read, and he had plenty to learn from his parents. Layla agreed but asked if he ever felt the desire to play with other kids, mentioning that his older sisters were both attending the academy. Dane, finding her persistence amusing, told her that he might consider going in the future if the time felt right. Layla insisted that he had to tell her if he decided to go, to which he simply agreed. She also invited him to visit her house when he came to the capital, promising to show him what she had been practicing. Dane agreed, assuring her that he'd send her a letter if he ever planned a trip to the capital. Layla then remembered something and asked when he would tell her his request, as it was his turn to ask for a favor. Dane casually replied that he'd let her know when he visited the capital. Shocked, Layla asked what he meant by that, but Dane just smiled, leaving her wondering. The next morning, as Thermion and Layla prepared to leave the Sagar's castle, Dane and his family came to see them off. Thermion handed Dane a stone with a symbol on it, which Dane curiously inspected. He asked Thermion what it was, and Thermion explained that it was a birthday present and hoped Dane liked it. The stone appeared valuable, and Thermion explained that it bore the symbols of the Thermion house, revenge, the sword, and the blacksmith. Their house's history, he explained, began with their progenitor, a blacksmith. Thermion continued, adding that thanks to their progenitor, their house boasted the best forge in the empire and the entire continent. All of the weapons that guided the empire were made there, and the forge created all kinds of mystical weapons and artifacts. Dane smiled, knowing that the forge was renowned even beyond the empire. Thermion then told Dane that if he visited the forge and showed them the insignia, they would craft any weapon he desired. The insignia was essentially a certificate of honor and skill for whoever held it. Arkan, seeing the precious insignia, was shocked and remarked that even the imperial family would desire such a thing. Thermion simply patted Dane on the head and told him to grow well and help his father. Dane thanked him, and Layla waved goodbye with a smile as she left with her father. Back in the present, Dane's mother, Lily, asked if he was sad to see Layla leave. Dane admitted that he was, explaining that Layla was practically his first friend. Lily comforted him, saying that when he went to the capital, he would see Layla again and could surprise her by becoming even more handsome. Dane remained silent, reflecting that he couldn't stay in the castle forever. He had promised Layla that he would see her again when he visited the capital, and he intended to keep that promise. Meanwhile, in the Thermion carriage on the road, Thermion found himself deep in thought. Every time he looked at Dane, he was reminded of Argrick, the warrior who had shown the abilities of a triple-class warrior at a young age. Thermion knew that if Argrick had lived, he could have become one of the Hexa-class knights of the Drenic Empire. Thermion smiled, wishing to see how Dane would grow in the future. A few days later, Dane was in his room, staring at the egg his sister Claire had gifted him. He had been feeding it Mana every morning and evening, but he wondered if it was still too early for it to hatch. The egg, holding a mysterious familiar, was special. Even if someone wasn't a summoner, they could instill the egg with their mana, imprinting themselves as its master before it hatched, and thereby gain permanent control over a familiar that would normally only stay temporarily. However, Dane knew the quality of his mana needed to match the familiars, and there were likely other tricky conditions that still hadn't been fulfilled. He touched the egg to feed it mana, remembering that some eggs never hatch because their conditions aren't met. He hoped that wouldn't be the case with his egg. Even when he changed the flow and strength of his mana, the egg gave no reaction. Still, he continued feeding it until he saw the mana being reflected, a sign it was full. He then placed the egg back in its box, thinking that maybe he was too greedy, hoping for it to hatch on his first try. Just then, Herman entered the room, asking if he was ready to leave. Dane replied that he was coming but suddenly heard a faint noise from the egg. He quickly moved closer, certain he had heard something. Herman rushed in, worried, asking what Dane had heard. Dane asked for a moment to check the egg. He held it again but felt no difference, leaving him to wonder if he had imagined the sound. Disappointed, he told Herman that there was no reaction after all, and they proceeded to leave. Later, at the training ground, Dane was dashing and rolling as he swung the sword in his hands. He practiced various sword techniques, repeating each one to perfect his form. After executing a final slash, he stood up. Herman clapped, impressed, and asked when Dane had trained with the sword. Dane casually replied that he just felt like swinging it around a little. Herman, smiling, remarked that Dane was clearly talented with the sword as well. Dane smiled to himself, realizing how much fun it was to practice with a new weapon. He hadn't had the chance to hold a sword recently since his father had been watching him so closely, but he was relieved that he hadn't lost his touch in swordsmanship. Herman approached with a cookie, offering him a snack before he continued. Dane gratefully accepted, thinking that it might be a good idea to train more with the sword. Meanwhile, in his office, Arkan was gazing out the window, thinking how repetitive things had become each year. Still, he was pleased with how much they had gained during the last banquet. He had been able to confirm that many nobles were paying attention to the south, most of whom were interested in forming good relationships with the Sagar's family. Arkan also knew that since the war had ended, the south's favorable climate and resources were highly coveted by the nobility. However, he realized that the attention on his son, Dane, far exceeded anything else. The conflict with Count Tyron's eldest son had been unexpected. But Dane had calmly explained the situation to the adults and confidently demonstrated his talent. Arkan mused that Dane was far more mature than most children his age. Sometimes, he wished Dane would act more like a regular child, a little less serious, but he knew that was simply his own desire. Glancing at the clock, Arkan noted that it was almost time to leave. He looked over at his spear, Dragon Tail, and decided that he would make Dane swing it a bit during their training session today. Arkan headed to the training ground, carrying the Dragon Tail spear, only to be shocked when he saw Dane swinging a sword. Arkan paused, confused as to why his son, who had trained with the spear for so long, was using a sword instead. He immediately suspected that Duke Thermion must have said something to Dane to influence him. Otherwise, why would Dane suddenly switch weapons? As Arkin continued to watch, he observed Dane skillfully execute a series of sword techniques, slashing downward and then smoothly bringing the sword back up. The precision in Dane's movements was something that even seasoned swordsmen, who had trained their whole lives, couldn't easily replicate. Arkin couldn't help but wonder when Dane had learned such refined swordsmanship. One thing was clear, though, Dane was naturally talented with the sword as well. Arkin interrupted his son's training, telling him that he had been watching and asking when Dane had learned swordsmanship. Dane froze, realizing he had been caught, and decided that maybe it was best to tell the truth. He explained that he hadn't really learned swordsmanship in a formal sense. Arkin, shocked, understood then that it wasn't just training, it was pure talent. Arkin remarked in amazement that Dane had now demonstrated skill in spearmanship, magic, assassination, summoning, and swordsmanship. He admitted that if anyone else had told him a child could show such talent across so many disciplines, he wouldn't have believed it. Arkin then asked Dane if he was curious about the world outside their territory. Dane, though confused, had an idea of what his father was getting at. Arkin clarified that he was referring to the world beyond the walls of their home, suggesting that the county might be too small for someone with Dane's talent. Arkin warned that if Dane stayed confined there, he might be limiting his potential. Dane stayed quiet for a moment, realizing that Arkin had accepted that he couldn't keep his son in the county forever. Finally, Dane admitted that he was indeed curious about the outside world. Arkin smiled and told him that it was time to start preparing for his journey beyond their borders. Surprised, Dane asked if Arkin really meant it, to which Arkin replied that, although it was bittersweet, he must honor his son's desire to explore. Arkin then stamped the dragon-tail spear into the ground and revealed that he had brought something special for Dane. When Dane saw the spear, he was shocked, recognizing it immediately. Arkin asked if he remembered the dragon tail, reminding him that it had reacted to him on his first birthday. Dane confirmed that he did indeed remember, and Arkin handed the spear to him, telling him to try holding it. The moment Dane grasped the spear, it emitted a bright light. He was amazed at the surge of power he felt flowing through it. Arkin was thrilled, noting that the dragon tail's reaction was much stronger now than it had been when Dane was a child. In that moment, Arkin vowed that he would ensure Dane's talent with the spear would shine the brightest. Placing a hand gently on Dane's shoulder, Arkin told him that he wanted to help him master the spear before he left to explore the world. Dane, brimming with confidence, agreed. Arkin then reminded him that one day, the dragon-tail spear would be his, but before that, he needed to grow strong enough to wield it with pride. Dane responded earnestly, saying that rather than focusing on the spear itself, he would work hard to wield his father's teachings with pride. Arkin laughed heartily, proud of his son, and shouted that he expected nothing less from him. With that, Arkin asked if they should begin their training, to which Dane replied with a determined yes. After his training with his father, Dane lay back in his room, thinking about the outside world. He had always been curious about it. As he recalled his life as Argric, he remembered that all he had ever known was war, roaming the battlefield, tidying camp, cleaning weapons, eating bland food, and fighting. The only escape had been for the war to end or to die in battle. He had never been able to imagine a life outside of the battlefield. But as Dane, things were different. He didn't know how his talents would be used, how the world would accept him, or what he could do, but he knew he now had the opportunity to explore, travel, and accomplish anything he set his mind to. For a while, Dane had only wanted to stay in the warmth of his home, enjoying the peaceful life with his family. But thanks to his father's question, his thoughts had shifted. After organizing his thoughts, he decided it was time to go outside. Suddenly, his mother entered the room, surprising him. She commented that it seemed he had made a decision, making Dane sit up in shock. He hadn't heard her come in. Lily assured him not to worry, saying he was so deep in thought that he hadn't even heard her knock. When he asked if she had knocked, she replied that she hadn't mentioned that Arkin had told her Dane would be reflecting on things. She then asked if he was curious about the world outside their county, to which Dane admitted that he was. He explained that Arkin had said it would be a waste of his talent to stay in one place, and after thinking it over, he agreed. He was curious about the outside world as well. Dane then apologized to his mother, but she hugged him gently and told him there was no need to apologize. Dane, saddened, expressed concern that since his sisters were away, she would be left alone if he left too. But Lily reassured him, saying she knew how incredible his talent was, and that even if he didn't want to go, the outside world would have called for him eventually. Dane, still worried, called out to his mother, but she smiled warmly and continued. She admitted that although she would have loved for him to stay longer, the world had different plans for him. She encouraged him to go out and pursue what he wanted. Dane promised her that even if he left, he would return often and tell her all about the things he saw and experienced. Lily thanked him for his thoughtfulness and remarked that it looked like she, too, would need to prepare to send him out into the world, just like Arkin. Confused, Dane asked what she meant by preparation. Lily, excited, explained that she had planned to teach him tracking skills gradually, but now she would need to move on to more advanced lessons, including setting and avoiding traps. Dane wondered if he was about to receive special training from his mother, just as he had from his father. Lily continued, adding that he would need to learn how to eliminate traces, including dealing with corpses, and that he would have to study the structure of the human body. Dane smiled awkwardly, realizing that he was going to be exhausted even before he set foot outside their home. She reassured him that she would teach him many valuable things, and Dane agreed wholeheartedly, promising to do his best to learn. As he gazed at his mother's warm smile, he realized that this would be a special lesson, born from the love his parents had for him. He knew that if he wanted to explore the world, he would need to be prepared, and his parents were equipping him with everything he needed to succeed. Years later, in the southern region of the Althian Empire, Sagar's County had become a cornerstone of the empire. With its warm climate and abundant natural resources, it helped sustain the empire's strength during the war. Thanks to Count Sagar's generous leadership, the region enjoyed peace and prosperity. When the war finally ended, the last remnants of rebel forces were captured, and an era of peace, which seemed like it would last forever, settled over the land. One bright, warm morning, in the bustling streets of Sagars, citizens were abuzz with rumors about their young master, Dane, visiting the local shops. Some couldn't believe the news, but others confirmed it, saying they had seen Dane buying something from a shop, and that the shopkeeper's eldest daughter fainted from the excitement of seeing him. One woman expressed disbelief at the rumors, while another, more enthusiastic, said she had heard that Dane was becoming more handsome by the day. She dreamily wished to catch a glimpse of him, especially since he wasn't betrothed yet. The first woman asked if she was serious, reminding her that Dane was only 14. But the second woman persisted, explaining that from what she had heard, Dane didn't seem like a typical 14-year-old. He was already as tall as the Count. The first woman, intrigued, suggested that maybe Dane's impressive height came from the Countess as well, as she was known to be tall. The second woman continued, gushing about how Dane could easily be mistaken for a 20-year-old, and how his striking silver hair and green eyes would make anyone's heart stop if they saw him. The first woman, now curious, resolved to try and see Dane the next time he visited. She asked when he might come again, to which the second woman responded that Dane often visited the shops. The first woman added that the forest keeper had mentioned seeing him as well, and the second woman joked that it might be easier to meet the forest keeper first and work from there, leaving the first woman shocked by her boldness. Meanwhile, in the outskirts of the county, where birds and beasts roamed the area infused with the ancient magic of the last days, Dane was carrying out an escape mission assigned by his mother, Lily Sagars. Walking through the dense forest, Dane gripped his spear tightly. The wind blew from the south, and he recalled spotting a Cheryl spider in that direction, deciding to head west instead. He checked his remaining time, 3 hours until sunset, and knew he needed to find a way out before dark. Dane leapt from tree to tree, searching for an exit. One of the most crucial aspects of assassination, he reminded himself, was not getting caught by the enemy. In this exercise, Dane needed to avoid the traps and nets set up by his mother and escape from the forest, which was full of additional dangers. After landing on the ground, he hid behind a large stone, focusing on his surroundings. He took a deep breath, blending into the environment to remain undetected. As his senses sharpened, he spotted hidden traps, nearly invisible strings stretched across the area. Dane marveled at the intricate traps, realizing they would activate as soon as anything disturbed the strings. He pierced the ground lightly with his spear, recognizing this was one of the most basic but dangerous mechanisms. Lifting his coat carefully, he prepares to disarm the trap. Just as he was about to move, a sound caught his attention. Tilting his head, Dane spotted a pack of Ruselt, a predatory beast, emerging from hiding. The Ruselt growled menacingly and began charging at him with terrifying speed. Dane instinctively reached for his spear but quickly realized that any sudden movement could trigger the trap. He decided to retreat for now, knowing the situation would become more dangerous if he stayed. The Ruselt leapt from the trees, chasing after him as he ran. Glancing back, Dane saw the beasts crash into the thin strings, triggering the trap. Sharp needles rained down from above, piercing the Ruselt caught in the trap's range and killing them instantly. Dane turned to confirm that most of the Ruselt had been dealt with, but to his shock, one managed to dodge the falling needles. It charged at him, teeth bared, closing in for a bite. Fortunately, Dane dashed to the side, dodging the Ruselt's attack, but he quickly realized how fast the creature was. It turned around and spit out a strange liquid, which floated toward him. Although he didn't know exactly what it was, his instincts told him it was dangerous. Without hesitation, he spun his spear to deflect the liquid, scattering it harmlessly away. Relieved that he had blocked the attack, he knew he couldn't afford to waste more time. He leaped forward to meet the Ruselt head-on as it charged at him again. Just before the impact, he infused his spear with mana and slashed at the Ruselt multiple times at lightning speed. In mere seconds, the creature was cut in half, but as Dane glanced back, he saw that the rusult had been sliced into pieces, its shrieks of pain filling the air before it suddenly exploded. Hours later, with the sun beginning to set, Dane finally managed to escape the forest. He collapsed onto the ground, catching his breath. Exhausted from running, he felt like he might throw up but was grateful to have escaped safely. As he lay there, he heard someone approaching. Annoyed at the thought of facing another threat, he jumped to his feet, spear in hand, ready for whatever was coming. However, his irritation quickly turned to surprise when he realized it was his mother, Lily. Lily praised him for his performance, noting that he had completed the escape in a total of 3 hours and 30 minutes, faster than her own time. Dane asked if she had been watching him the entire time, to which she responded that she couldn't just leave him alone. Approaching him with a smile, she admitted that although she was fully aware of his talent, as his mother, it was different to watch him face such challenges. Dane nodded, understanding her concern. Lily gently patted his head, telling him that he had done exceptionally well and that she couldn't find a single fault in his execution. She then asked if he had gotten hurt, and Dane reassured her that he was perfectly fine. Amazed by his progress, Lily teased that at this rate, he might end up getting recruited as an assassin. Reaching into her sleeve, Lily pulled out a dagger and handed it to him. Dane was shocked to recognize the weapon. It was Nighthorn, his mother's famed dagger. Hesitantly, he asked if she really meant for him to take it. Lily smiled, saying she wouldn't be using it anymore. She explained that Nighthorn was crafted from the rare ethereal ore, a material capable of absorbing elements and storing all the poisons in the world if needed. It could even combine the absorbed poisons for lethal use. Dane thanked his mother sincerely, promising to treat the dagger well. Lily was pleased, and she asked if they should head back. As he tucked Nighthorn inside his coat, Dane guessed that this was the end of his training for the day. But just as they were about to leave, a loud scream echoed from deep within the forest, startling them both. Dane immediately asked his mother if she had heard it too, and Lily confirmed she had. She told him that it sounded like someone was in trouble, and they should quickly investigate. Dane agreed, and without hesitation, they both rushed back into the forest, determined to find the source of the scream. Later, in the annexed tower of Saugers County, an old man woke up with a painful growl, screaming as he caught his breath. Disoriented, he looked around, trying to recall where he was. He remembered being in the forest, eating mushrooms. Just then, Dane entered the room, carrying a tray. He approached the old man and calmly told him that he was still undergoing detoxification, so he shouldn't move. The old man, confused by the sight of the young man, asked if Dane had saved him. Dane confirmed, explaining that the old man had eaten a red-nosed mushroom but, fortunately, they had found him in time. The old man was shocked and couldn't believe he had eaten something so dangerous. As Dane handed him a cup of water, he warned the old man that if they had arrived even a little later, he would have become a corpse. Grateful, the old man took the water and drank it. As he did, Dane noticed the insignia on the old man's belt. It was from the Nixian Magic Tower. This meant the old man wasn't an ordinary person. Reflecting for a moment, Dane realized that without his mother's dagger, Nighthorn, he wouldn't have been able to save him in time. The old man thanked Dane again and asked where he was. Dane replied that they were in the Saugers County Annex Tower. The old man's eyes widened in realization. He hadn't just gotten lost in the southern region but had also been poisoned by a deadly mushroom and somehow made his way to the Saugers estate. Dane reassured him that he should rest for now and informed him that his father would soon come to see him. Upon hearing this, the old man asked if Dane was the youngest son of Count Saugers. Dane confirmed it, introducing himself as Dane Saugers, the Count's youngest. Recognizing the name, the old man remarked that this meant he was the younger brother of Arabella, the genius attracting attention from all the magic towers. Curious, the old man asked how Dane had found him. Dane explained that he had been training with his mother in the forest when they heard the old man's scream. The old man, surprised, asked if Dane had really been training in that treacherous forest. As an 8-chain mage, the old man himself had been caught off guard by the forest's dangerous environment. The flow of mana had reversed while he was casting a spell, leaving his body weakened and disoriented. He couldn't believe that someone so young was training in such a perilous area. The old man then asked Dane if it was true that the entire forest held ancient mana and was riddled with traps. Dane calmly confirmed it, explaining that the forest was their family's property, and dangerous for anyone not familiar with its unique characteristics. He warned that since the flow of mana in the forest was ancient and different from what modern mages used, it was especially hazardous for any mage to navigate. He also reminded the old man that the red-nosed mushroom had nearly been his undoing. The old man broke into a cold sweat, horrified at how close he had come to death. Realizing something, he stared at Dane, asking if he had made the antidote himself. When Dane confirmed this, the old man was stunned. Dane, who appeared to be just a teenager, had formulated an antidote that required advanced knowledge and intricate production skills. The old man gazed at Dane in disbelief. How could such a family exist? With Arabella, a generational magic genius, and now even the youngest son displaying such remarkable talent, the Sagres family seemed extraordinary. The old man couldn't help but think that if the Empire were still at war, the Sagres county might have become the most powerful noble house within the Althian Empire.